Hi, everyone. I want you to close your eyes for just a few seconds and think back. Think back to a time, maybe last week, or maybe when you were much younger, a time when your worst fears came true. Maybe you found out that your best friend had betrayed you, that something that you had told her in total confidence had become the talk of the entire town. Maybe the people that you used to sit with at lunch told you you couldn't sit there anymore. Maybe someone told you through their words or through their actions that you weren't worthy of taking up space on this planet. A woman named Jody Blanco went through pain like this and more, all before she graduated from high school. For years, she was the target of countless forms of abuse. Athletes at her school stuffed handfuls of snow into her mouth and left her there struggling to breathe. People spat on her in the parking lot. Someone threw her favorite pair of dress shoes into a school toilet. And even a teacher laughed at her in front of the whole class and made her feel like an outcast. Young Jody proved to be amazingly resilient. Instead of accepting her classmates' judgment that she was unworthy, she rose above it, creating a high-powered career for herself in public relations. But through it all, she never forgot the horrific bullying that she'd gone through, and she knew that there were thousands of other kids just like her going through the same thing. So she decided to create her own anti-bullying program called It's Not Just Joking Around, and that's Jody right there with some of the kids. And so thousands of kids across the country have heard Jody talk about her childhood, the effects of bullying, and how victims can reclaim their dignity. I asked Jody what made her want to create this program, and she told me that one of her goals was to turn her pain into purpose, that by helping other people avoid some of the pain that she'd gone through, she could give her own life meaning. In songs, in stories, and in real life, the hero's journey includes what Joseph Campbell calls a road of trials, where the hero faces difficult tests or ordeals. Now, we all go through suffering at some point or another. It's just part of life. But how could that pain possibly inspire a heroic quest to leave the world better than we found it? A researcher named Irvin Staub has looked at the connections between suffering and selflessness. And Staub was a young Jewish boy living in Budapest, Hungary during the Second World War. And when he and his family had to hide from the occupying Nazis, a Christian woman named Maria risked her life to help feed him and his family. And Staub was so moved by the kindness that Maria had shown that much later, after he moved to the US and became a psychologist, he spent a good portion of his career studying altruism, or what makes us want to help others. And when he sent out a survey to people asking them this question of what motivates you to help, he got a pretty wide array of answers, but one of the things that people said over and over was, I want to help people because I've suffered, and I don't want other people to have to suffer the same way that I did. And Staub was intrigued by this answer. It wasn't necessarily something that he expected. So, along with his colleague Joanna Volhart, he decided to design a study. He asked people if they'd ever been through significant trauma, such as violence or a natural disaster. Then he asked them whether they felt sorry for victims of a recent Southeast Asian tsunami or would be willing to donate money to help them. And it turned out that the people that had been through great suffering themselves were more likely to say that they wanted to help the tsunami victims. And it seemed like what was happening was that people who had suffered felt a kind of kinship with other people who were suffering, and that motivated them to help. And in his writing, Staub started referring to this phenomenon as altruism born of suffering. Now, I'm not here to tell you that suffering necessarily has a point in itself. Of course, we'd all prefer not to go through pain, but if we have to suffer, are there ways that we can redeem that pain and use it on our heroic journeys? Oftentimes, I think we get the message from our culture that if we're in pain, it means that something is seriously awry and that we should try to eliminate that pain or forget about it as soon as possible. But what the evidence points to is something that great thinkers have been saying for many years, and that is that hidden beneath the tough shell of challenges and trials can be the seed of a whole new life. A few years ago, I went through a pretty difficult time in my life. Career-wise, things had gotten a little bit rocky. I was getting hate email and nasty comments in response to things I had written. I felt like I had totally screwed up and like I was a failure. Eventually, I was diagnosed with depression, and because of the way that my thoughts had sort of gone haywire, it was really hard for me to see my problems realistically. And to be honest, a lot of days I didn't really feel like it was worth it to get up off the couch. And thankfully, through treatment and through the support of people who loved me, I was able to overcome my depression. But I came through the experience changed. I could see the way going through my own tough times had kind of softened me up and made me more open and more receptive to other people who were suffering. And I think that people could sense that change in me as well. And it's like Jody Blanco once said to me, let's say you were walking down the street, you fell into a hole, and two people offered to help. One of them was a renowned scientist who had written a paper on the dynamics of holes, and the other was just an average person who'd fallen into the same hole himself and was offering to climb back down, grab your hand, and lead you out the same way that he found. And whose help would you want? And it was actually the surprising way that my own tough times awakened my empathy that was one of the things that inspired me to write a book about the science of becoming a better person. I decided I wanted to pass along wisdom like this to people who could use it on their own heroic journeys. And the amazing thing, looking back on it, is that if it hadn't been for that low point that I went through in my own life, that book would probably not exist today. So, what do you do if you want to turn all that dross, all those difficult things that you've gone through, into gold? How can you start to see the bad things that happen not just as obstacles on your hero's journey, but as events that inspire that journey in some significant way? Now, I know that a lot of people don't like to work through their pain. They kind of leap back from it like it's a hot stove. They really don't want to deal with it. And, that's completely up to them. But I think that if you do that, you might be missing out on some pretty important learning opportunities too. And I think it's really important to seek support, whether it's from a therapist or from a close friend, as you start to process some of the stuff that you've been through. And that support is going to help you heal, and it's also going to help you get perspective on some of the things that you've gone through. And I think you really need to have that perspective before you can start to move past it and build something new. It's not easy, but I think it's good to get to the point where you can ask yourself, what have I learned through this whole experience? How has it changed me as a person? And how can I draw on these difficult events to give comfort to somebody else? Now, thinking this way is not going to erase your pain, as you probably guessed. But what it can do is open you up to the reality that there are so many other people out there facing similar pain, and that you might be uniquely well equipped to identify with that pain and to help them through it. It also helps to have role models wounded warriors who have succeeded in turning their own pain into purpose. Learn about Miep Gies, who starved as a child and who later hid Anne Frank and her family from the Nazis when they too found themselves facing hard times through no fault of their own. Or learn about Anurada Koirala, a battered woman herself who founded a home in Nepal for women escaping from the horrors of sex slavery. Or learn about Georgia school clerk Antoinette Tuff. Now, Tuff went through a period of deep depression in her own life after her husband left her. And when a young, troubled man named Michael Brandon Hill burst into her office one day waving an AK-47, she was afraid. But at the same time, she could identify with the inner turmoil that the shooter was going through. And so she decided to talk to him. She said, hey, we all go through these tough times in our lives, but she told him about how he didn't have to resort to anything like this, that if she could overcome all the tough stuff that she had faced, that he could overcome his problems too. So, she talked to him, she treated him like a human being, and she even told him that she loved him. And it was through the power of her own hard-won empathy that she was able to convince him to put down his gun so that every child who went to that school could return home safely. And today, I want to invite you to break through the tough shell of your own pain, to come to terms with what you've gone through and what you learned from it. It could be that you might discover some precious insight there, something that you can nurture and cultivate in ways that also nourish the world. Thank you very much.